So if we're going to do something different, then we have to start with stopping what we're doing already. And so that's where the title came from. Start with stop. Right? It sometimes you just have to come to a dead stop. We only stress over things we don't control. We don't stress over things we can control. Why would you stress over it if you can control it, right?
My own community, when we're having calls, I tell people, look, I've got some secret sauce and I can teach you how to do the things we do, but I also need to be transparent and make sure everybody understands at the end of the day, I'm fighting the same battle every one of you are. I'm in the exact same trenches. We have to fight for retention. We have to fight for new business. We have to do all of the same things. And so I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword with what we have in front of us now in terms of digital platforms, because it allows you the opportunity to connect with people you otherwise might not connect with, to get that type of advice if you build those kinds of relationships. And it makes it easier to stay in touch after those conferences and things where you see people in person.
If you're going to stay in the business, nobody talks to you about what happens on the emotional side. And that's where usually the disgruntled piece comes into play, is nobody's preparing that former agency owner for what it's going to be like to be a former agency owner working in somebody else's business, handling what used to be yours.
If I truly want to invest time getting to know somebody, then I want to know who they are. It doesn't need to be surface level. So I'll ask a lot of questions about Islam to our team because I don't understand it. I've never really done anything to learn it. And rather than me watching the news and figuring out what they want me to believe, or, 60 Minutes or whatever, I'm going to ask them and I'm going to get the right answer.
Making the unfamiliar familiar than it is getting out of your comfort zone. Because what I want to get to is my comfort zone. I'm not comfortable in my familiar zone. I want to get to a comfort zone. I got to get out of my familiar zone. It's kind of backwards the way that we think about it, the way that we look at it, and the way that we talk about it. But it's not hard to think about it differently if you just start thinking about it differently, right? I'm going to tell you the secret of life right now. The secret of life is life comes from you, not at you.
Too many times you get involved in a conversation and you're listening to respond as opposed to listening to understand. And to me, that is a massive black hole that you can get into in the sales game that you don't want to be in. The absolute best producers are the people who can ask the open-ended question and just sit back and listen and process to understand that other person and where they're coming from, as opposed to always having the answer the second somebody tells you where they're coming from. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And one of the ways we do that is we don't just talk to people that are in the industry now. I like to get the perspective of people that have been in the industry for a long time, and in some cases, maybe even have had their fill of insurance and decided they wanted to take their skill set and make an impact on the world in a different way. And that happens to be the case with our guest today, Mr. Ray Gage, who spent a few decades, all the way back to 1980, working in the insurance industry. And I'm sure we'll get into some of that today, but is now doing mindful business coaching and has a book coming out sometime in December. I know what it's like when you're going to release a book. You think you got it all dialed in and then things happen, but we're hopeful it'll be in December, and we're going to probably talk a lot about that today too. And if you listen to the very end, I'm going to give you away that you might be one of the lucky dozen people that we will send a copy of this book to from the Power Producers as our gift, thanking you for listening to this episode. So make sure you pay attention and get the instructions, because I'm only going to send them to the people who do it the right way, and they're not hard. What's up, Ray?
Hey man, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite. It was a pleasant surprise. I've watched the podcast for a long time. I don't catch every episode, right? That's difficult to do, but
I don't either. You're good.
Yeah. But I appreciate what you've brought to the table for the middle market producer over the years in the insurance space, and what you're doing is different and refreshing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's what I try and do, to be honest with you. And, when I was younger, I used to get picked on for looking at the world differently or thinking differently. Now it's actually advantageous for me to do that. So I'm glad I stuck to my guns and didn't conform to the norms of what people expected out of me and continue to push the envelope a little bit. But before we get into some of the stuff you're doing in your business coaching in the book, talk a little bit about your background. I mean, because that's a pretty storied career, and I didn't go in and do stalker level research on you, but in looking at your LinkedIn profile, I know that you were involved with the Institute of Workers Comp Professionals, and love Kevin and Preston, and then just talked a little bit ago. You have a relationship with Randy and Dustin Boss, who are also good friends and certainly big supporters of what we do at Killing Commercial and Power Producers. So just kind of give everybody your background story, and that's going to establish the foundation, and we'll build from there.
Sure. So I actually started in the insurance industry. It was 1988, and I started with it was an accident. How many people get in on purpose? I mean, the majority of us get into this industry or the insurance industry on accident. I was not an exception to that rule, and it was just something that kind of fell into my lap when I wasn't even looking for it. But I started as a district sales manager for a small farmer mutual in Huntington, Indiana,
Hmm.
and I was there for about, I would say, 6 months after starting to call on agencies and realized that that was the side of the business I wanted to be on, not the company side. So, I was honing my skills, I was learning the business, and I decided to start looking around for an opportunity. I found an opportunity, and in 1992, I went into the agency side. And then in 1997, I purchased an agency. So, and then from 1997 into 2017, I owned my own agency, grew that agency, and then sold that agency to another firm in 2018, actually. So in 2018, I transitioned from an agency owner to a former agency owner working for the agency that purchased my agency. So the different layers of experience that I have in the industry are really kind of diverse. So I actually sometimes, depending on who I talk to, it's really easy to be disgruntled as a former agency owner and I was one of those. But then, so now I call myself a formerly disgruntled former agency owner.
Well, I was gonna say it's easy to get disgruntled as a current agency owner too. So I
Yeah,
mean, there's that. But
right,
what was
right.
that? So when you sold, did you sell to private equity, or was it actually like just another agency that wanted to come in and acquire you?
So it was just another agency that wanted to come in and acquire. They were looking to, they're an Indiana only agency at the time. They're now looking to expand into other states, family owned agency, but acquiring smaller family owned agencies around the state and then consolidating. Actually, they have a different model. They keep the location that they purchase instead of rolling it into another location, unless it's like a next door type of a
Hmm.
situation.
So what was that like? I mean, was it the same deal you hear from all of my other friends that have sold their agency, that one day, you're running the agency, the next thing you do, you hand the keys over to the other person, and then they hand them back and say, come back to work again tomorrow, but now we own the agency. I mean, what was that dynamic like? Because I've oft, and I'm really asking this from a selfish perspective. I've always thought it would be really, really difficult when and if the time comes for me to exit, if I were to do that with a third party, that I have any kind of an earnout or any kind of a time where I have to be a trail for a couple of years and work under the group that bought me. I would almost be willing to take less, or I would be willing to take less money just to be able to say, okay, you want it? Here you go. It's yours. Go on. And I'm done. Right. Because I think it would be, there's a reason I'm an agency principal now, and that reason is I really have a very difficult time having partners and working with anybody else when I want to be able to be the one who can call the shots and turn on a dime. And I just think that I would have a very difficult time transitioning and would probably end up putting my earnout in jeopardy in some way, shape, or form anyhow.
That's probably true, and I'll say that because there's two different the here's the disconnect. So there's a disconnect, and I've had a lot of conversations with people about this, and I had the same disconnect. Is when you're selling your agency, then you're the customer, right? So now someone is trying to sell you on the idea of selling their agency. So then you're in the position of being sold to, and you know what it's like when you're being sold to. So the picture that's painted is not the anything bad, right? It's all the great stuff that's going to
Sure.
happen if you sell your agency to us and all this other thing. So there's and everything that's talked about is the financial aspect of it, but the piece that gets left out is the emotional side of it. So and the seller a lot of times doesn't even have a point of reference for that because they've never done it. They've just always been in the position of being the buyer and trying to sell you on the idea of selling to them. So, but what they miss is, and this is what happened to me, and I know this happens to a lot of other former agency owners because I've talked to a lot of them, is that nobody, if you're going to stay in the business, nobody talks to you about what happens on the emotional side. And that's where usually the disgruntled piece comes into play is nobody's preparing that former agency owner for what it's going to be like to be a former agency owner working in somebody else's business, handling what used to be yours. And there's a really big gap there. And I mean, we could talk about that, could be a whole podcast.
I listen, and I'll tell you, man, I years ago I had this exact same conversation with Scott Addis about what it was like when he sold, the Addis Group the first time to Susquehanna National Bank and the immediate seller's remorse that he had afterwards. And then, he ended up bringing it back and now he's divested again, but probably should at this point because Scott's not getting any younger and needs to enjoy the fruits of the labor for all that he's done to build it. But that's what struck me. And when you hear somebody that's vulnerable and transparent that can tell you, look, no, like I woke up the next morning and thought, what the heck did I do? Like, is this the worst decision I've ever made? I'm not really somebody who second guesses myself. I just make quick decisions, and if they're right, great. If they're not, I also course correct quick until I get to the right decisions. But something like that, I think it would end up really haunting me and tearing at me a little bit, knowing, especially, man, 20 years. Come on, you've been you had your agency for a good long period of time. Not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. It's not at all. And for me, it didn't happen immediately. I didn't wake up the next morning with seller's remorse. I didn't. It actually was going really well for a period of time, but then when you become part of something bigger and that bigger is still becoming bigger, then there's going to be changes. And those changes are not changes that were even anticipated by the ownership group that purchased you because they didn't know what to anticipate for their growth plans until they had the growth. So then you're caught in the middle of, hey, wait a minute, this all of a sudden this is changing, this wasn't supposed to. And then you start pointing fingers about at other people and blaming them for you being disgruntled. And that's counterproductive. And I did that until I woke up one morning and realized, hey, wait a second here. How I feel is my responsibility, not theirs. It's not doing me any good or them any good for me to feel this way. And I need to figure this out. This isn't up to them to figure out for me. I need to figure this out. It would have been a great conversation, I think, to have with somebody before I did it, but I didn't know anybody that had been through the emotional aspect of it. But if you're an agency owner and you're at the point where you're thinking about doing this, find somebody that's done it like me and have a conversation about what is it that you're expecting to happen and how are you going to deal with things when they don't happen the way you're expecting. It's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, and it's probably I as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, you make the comment, it's me up to me to figure it out. It's really I think about how many things in our role, and it's probably in any other job too, but specifically as a producer in the insurance industry, how many of the things that we run into are things that are manifesting themselves in our own heads that we need to get that fixed first before we can push forward and do the next thing, whether it be call reluctance or, you lose an account and you allow yourself to have anxiety over it. It makes it more and more difficult to pick up the phone and make that next dial or whatever else. But I think that's a really good piece of advice to seek somebody out that's been through it before and let them be transparent with you about what really to expect, because the person's going to buy you is not going to represent that accurately. And if you've got somebody who's representing you in the deal, they're also getting paid for the deal happening, and they're going to want to make sure that that gets done. So they're going to do what they need to do to keep it on the rails. And you're kind of left out there with, no real sounding board or anybody to talk to, which is one of the reasons why I've always, felt like it's good when you're sitting at the top of the food chain in the agency. You don't always have people to talk to. Obviously, you don't have people that you can talk to about everything inside of your firm. But in the older days, and I say that intentionally because I think that social media, in the ability to have, Zoom meetings and talk online and all that, allows us to be far more connected than we used to be. But it seemed like, there's been this transition since my time in the industry, which has been about 20 years at this point, but even more recently, like in the last 5 to 10 years, where agency principals who typically would probably try and keep everything over here so that nobody knew what their secrets were, nobody knew what their processes were, their tricks, to an entire shift in thought process, at least in a subsection of the industry, to a more abundance mindset, where people realize that it's actually easier to collaborate, and there's plenty of business for all of us to go around. And if you can find that tribe that you're going to run with, and you can be who you really are, and ask the tough questions and take the tough feedback, but just be able to be transparent and open, and have people admit that it's like, not everything is not perfect. It just isn't. And I mean, even inside my own community, when we're having calls, I tell people, look, I've got some secret sauce and I can teach you how to do the things we do, but I also need to be transparent and make sure everybody understands at the end of the day, I'm fighting the same battle every one of you are. I'm in the exact same trenches. We have to fight for retention. We have to fight for new business. We have to do all of the same things. And so I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword with what we have in front of us now in terms of digital platforms, because it allows you the opportunity to connect with people you otherwise might not connect with, to get that type of advice if you build those kinds of relationships. And it makes it easier to stay in touch after those conferences and things where you see people in person. But I think the other side of it is, there are a lot of people out there that want you to think everything is perfect, that want you to think they have it all figured out. And I just can't subscribe to that, man, because I know that, at least in my career, I feel like I've done better than average. My results would indicate that when I look at production reports and financial metrics and things. But I also know I've gotten my teeth kicked in plenty of times, and I have no problem telling people that. I don't have a problem telling people that I've lost and when I've lost, because I'm going to reflect on that and think about, what would I do differently? Here's what I would recommend to you so you don't have this happen to you. And that's what I'm hearing you say in the sale of the agency, just the same as what a producer should be looking for in terms of a lifeline and support group to reach out to in terms of their own book of business and building their own career.
No, absolutely. And you say I don't have the answers to everything, but because I haven't experienced everything, and I haven't figured out everything I've experienced, but I do have the answers to some things, at least the way that they applied to me, and maybe they will apply to you. So that's why it's good to have that community aspect, right?
Yep.
And if I can approach other people and say, hey, here's my situation. What we do is we call it mindful business coaching, as you can see from the logo. And we're the only one. If you Google mindful business coaching, the only other thing that comes up is like a yoga studio that shut down in Arizona 10 years ago. But we call it mindful business coaching because everything that happens outside of you starts in your head. So if you really want to fix what you think is broken, you have to start with you. And that's the mindful aspect of it. And so your answer isn't my answer, and my answer is not your answer. But if I can point you in the direction of where you can find your answer, then that's what's more helpful than anything else. And my experience might give you some perspective that you didn't have before that will help you figure things out. And that's where having that peer input can be so important. And peer or mentor, right? If I can bounce things off of other people, so that's a great thing. And because they might have fixed the problem that I have in their world, but the answer might not be exactly the same in my world. But I can take that perspective and apply it because it's a different perspective than what I have.
So let me ask you this, because mindfulness is something you hear more and more about, and I know you referenced it being the yoga studio out in Arizona, but is there an intentionality behind mindful business coaching that employs some of those strategies of mindfulness that could be find their roots honestly in Far East religion from centuries ago? And the reason I'm intrigued by it is because you see it everywhere. Like I did a post, I didn't put it on LinkedIn, but on Facebook, about my fitness tracker that I wear. At the beginning of this year, I had been on the road for 2 or 3 years at this point and packed on a ton of weight, was not in the best shape that I could have been in, and just said, you know what, enough is enough, man. I gotta get myself in order and get my diet dialed in and my exercise and everything. And this Whoop fitness tracker gives you your strain and your recovery and your sleep, but part of recovery is making sure your body's actually ready to push to go to the next level. And it's ridiculous how much this thing knows. Like, it's honestly scary. It's not a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. Like, if I had one glass of wine with dinner last night, it will know that based on what it does to my heart rate variability and everything else. It's going to tell me the next day when I track in. But point being, one of the things you can do is mindfulness exercise to enhance your recovery, to make your body ready to push to the next level. I'm also friends with Josh Braun, who's on LinkedIn in a sales coach that's got a massive following. But a lot of what he teaches is mindfulness in the thought process and detaching from the outcome, and not, don't go with it instead of trying to create friction. Friction's not going to get you anywhere. And so I'm interested, like, was mindful and intentionally, I'm sure it was an intentionally chosen word, but was it chosen because that's kind of some of the thought processes that you adopt, or was it mindful more just in the Webster's definition of mindful, being mindful of something?
No, it would be more what the first. So it's about and you brought up something really interesting when you said that we have this perception that the mindfulness mantra came from Eastern philosophy. And what most people don't realize until they realize it is that it's also in Western religion.
Oh,
And
it's
it is
it's everywhere, right?
it's everywhere,
Absolutely.
right? And so then when I start to talk to people about it, I'm like, they're like, "Oh, that sounds like it's out there." Well, wait a minute. So, like, hey, can we talk about the Bible for a second? Because I can tell you how Jesus taught mindfulness. And then they're like, "Oh, I never thought about it that way," right? So it's more about understanding that, and I tell people this, like, if you here's the secret of life, right? And then it gets quiet. I'm going to tell you the secret of life right now. The secret of life is life comes from you, not at you. And that all goes back to, you can call it karma if you want to, but it's the law of sowing and reaping. You get what you give, but you can't give what you don't have. So that all comes back to mindfulness. I have to do the work on me, because how I show up for me is how I show up in the world. And that all goes back to mindfulness, because I have to start paying attention to what's going on in me. If I don't pay attention to what's going on in me, I can't make any improvements. I can't make any adjustments. I can't get to the point where I'm showing up better for someone else because I'm not even paying attention to how I'm showing up for me. So it's more that than it is the Webster's definition.
Yeah, got it. No, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense, and it's something that I completely agree with. I mean, I can look back, and you're right, by the way. A lot of people, when you hear that, especially, I grew up Southern Baptist in the southeastern part of the United States, so you're a Buddhist freak if you say something like that, down in this area. But the reality is, if I go back and look at when I've had the best results or felt the greatest about where I was at in life, my mind was sharp, my body was sharp, and my spiritual life was sharp. I was feeding all three of those things and intentionally investing in those three areas of my life. And when those three things work at the same level in complete unison, I am a very dangerous person, from in a good way, because I'm going to accomplish a lot. If I get out of whack in one of those three things, then it's not gonna work quite right. And so I've started like doing some of the mindfulness exercises and the things that you can do. But to your point, you can apply those same thought processes to literally anything. And I mean, using religion as an example, are we really that far off? Like, and I don't want to get weird here, but are the religions really that far off in terms of the core of what they believe and what they teach of the people who follow them and all that? I don't really think that they are. It's just a matter of what your own belief structure is and how you interpret that and what it means to you and what you're going to do to live your life under those circumstances. But I've got plenty of friends. Like, I've got a whole team of people that are Muslims over in Pakistan that do a lot of graphics and editing work for us and all of that. And society might want you to believe, or I hate to even say mainstream media because it's not even, I don't believe anything that the media says, but it's almost like they try and pit us against each other when the reality is we're far more similar than we are different. And even if you have the ability to have those open conversations about belief structures and religion and why you believe what you do or how you do what you do, I think that you find out that we're honestly a lot closer aligned than what we really realize. And it's interesting because people don't do that anymore, man. I don't understand it. Like, I think that sometimes I catch people off guard because there's not a question I'm not willing to ask if I want to know the answer to it. I mean, part of it is being in sales, and you ask a lot of questions and then sit back and listen. But if I truly want to invest time getting to know somebody, then I want to know who they are. It doesn't need to be surface level. So I'll ask a lot of questions about Islam to our team because I don't understand it. I've never really done anything to learn it, and rather than me watching the news and figuring out what they want me to believe, or 60 Minutes or whatever, I'm going to ask them and I'm going to get the right answer.
Right. You're going to get the answer from the source that understands the question and knows how to answer it. You're not getting it from somebody else. But I love everything that you just said, because I talk about it all the time. We are more, as human beings, we are more alike. There's more that makes us the same than what makes us different. And the reality is the only thing that makes any of us different from the other person is our experience of the things that make us the same. It's not the way I look. It's not my religion. It's not my gender. It's not my skin color. It's not my culture, my language. It's my experience of the things that make my experience of might be the culture, right? But then I look at it, we judge each other based on the external things because that's what we see. We don't take the time to sit back and think the person sitting across the table from me really is just trying to get through the day like I am. They just have a different perspective because of their experience. And how can I connect with them on a different level than just judging what I see on the outside? And if we spent more time, like if as a human race, if we spent more time doing that, then we wouldn't spend so much time fighting over dirt.
Agreed. Well, and it's funny too, man, because I mean, look, you're and I probably similar in age. I don't know how old you are. I turned 51 this year. You may have me by a couple. You may be a couple years younger. You're in good shape. However old you are, you carry yourself well. You look like you're in the gym on a regular basis and all that. But you know, I'm from the era where if you acted out in the neighborhood, the neighbors had free authority to do whatever they needed. Like relationships were just so much different. And I mean, we were talking about this the other day. Bullying has become such a problem. Bullying didn't exist as bullying when I was a kid. Like it was neighborhood justice, man. You fought it. If somebody picked on you, you had to make a decision. Am I going to punch this dude in the face or am I going to get punched in the face? And you're going to fight. You're going to figure it out. And the next day, or maybe even a couple hours later, you're back playing in the cul-de-sac again and nobody thinks anything of it. And now I feel like we get so thin-skinned, we're not putting ourselves in positions where we're uncomfortable because electronics in the digital age allows us to isolate ourselves from other people at will. And that was never an option, man. Like when we were kids, it was go outside and play until the streetlights come on, and whatever happens, you figure it out. Don't come in here telling me about it. I don't want to hear about it. And I feel like that growing up that way has put me in a position to where it makes it easier for me to handle things, and to a certain degree sometimes I know just from having conversations with my own kids that how I think about things is a condition, to your point, of going through the same experiences, but how I went through them versus them going through experiences I went through in some cases 30 years ago and seeing how they process that stuff now. And, I think that me being a father to four has allowed me to keep my mind open to understand that it's not my way or the highway. It's not because I said so. I genuinely want to understand, okay, from my perspective, you just made a bonehead decision. Tell me why you did. What did you process to go through that? Or tell me why you disagree with this, and being able to have those conversations. And it's just, to me, across the board, too many times you get involved in a conversation and you're listening to respond as opposed to listening to understand. And to me, that is a massive black hole that you can get into in the sales game that you don't want to be in. The absolute best producers are the people who can ask the open-ended question and just sit back and listen and process to understand that other person and where they're coming from, as opposed to always having the answer the second somebody tells you where they're coming from. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't know if it's fixable or if you start over. Like we were already talking about, maybe it's too broken to fix it, but I think there's definite applications there, and I think that could have a great impact on culture of organizations. I think it could have a great impact in relationships if you're in sales, and it also could have a great impact on your familial life if you can just step back and practice that stuff. And back to mindfulness around all of this. So, one of the things that Braun is on right now on LinkedIn, and he posts about it, God, 20 times a day, God love him. But it's detaching from the outcome. We're so worried about what the outcome is going to be that we talk ourselves out of a deal or whatever, when the reality is it's really out of your control. And you
Right.
just need to detach from that at the onset and have a normal conversation, and things tend to work themselves out.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up again because I follow Josh and I jump in and comment on his stuff on LinkedIn occasionally. And I love the idea of the detaching from the outcome. When I teach leadership, that's one of the things that I teach is what I call 3 rules for effective relationships. And that's rule number 3 is detach yourself from the outcome. I've had to change the way that I explain it though, because it's confusing to people. So a lot of people think detaching from the outcome means that they've asked me like, well, how do I do that? How do I pretend I don't care about the person?
Bingo, and that's it. It's not that you don't care.
Right. It's just not that you don't care. So what am I detaching? What I'm detaching is I'm detaching my emotions from the outcome. I'm not attaching how I feel about the person. I'm detaching how I feel about the outcome because the outcome is not within my control. So it's the outcome detachment isn't that I don't care about the person. I love and care deeply about the other person. But when I attach my emotions to that outcome, that's where stress comes in. I have no control. We only stress over things we don't control. We don't stress over things we can control. Why would you stress over it if you can control it, right?
Yep.
So, but the attaching my emotions to someone else's outcome is the third place where people stress. And the first two are pretty obvious. I'm worried about tomorrow or I'm depressed about yesterday. And those two things are outside of my control. The thing that is happening today that's outside of my control is my detached. I have my emotions attached, not detached. So I actually teach detaching from the outcome, but that's how I teach it. So people understand, okay, I can still care deeply about the other person. I can love them with all of my heart, but I don't have to attach my emotions to their outcome.
Makes perfect sense to me.
so so that's one of the fun things that I like to do then is take things that people have heard from other people and don't understand it and try to explain it to them in a way that makes sense to them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they need to hear that though, because that's one of the things. Again, not the podcast needs to be about Josh Braun, but you see it in the comments. I don't think that people necessarily understand
No, they
what
don't.
what he's trying to convey. I do,
Yep.
because he and I have had multiple conversations about this. But again, it goes back to we're in a digital age, and a lot of times we're just going to glance at something and form our opinion based off of it and not really understand it. So I appreciate you breaking that down. Start with stop. Talk to me about the book that's coming out in December, man. I'm interested, like, what I love the branding on it. Looks like a red and white, looks like a giant stop sign. So, what's the title mean? Where did it come from? And what's your mission with the book?
It's interesting because I can go so many different directions with this, but what it comes back to is, and we've talked a little bit about it already, and that's fixing something that's broken or starting over. And the premise behind the book is there's two pieces to it. So the first one is I got it when I got into the coaching space, which I didn't realize how natural of a transition that would be coming out of insurance, because when you're in insurance and you're in the middle market and you're working with businesses on a daily basis, you learn a lot more about business than you realize you're learning about business, and you
Well,
think
you
you're just
also learn how to coach because you're coaching and educating your clients and prospects all the time too, if you're doing your job right.
right, exactly. And I was more on the work comp side, right? So I started with the Institute in 2008. I got to be one of the first 50 MWCAs. So, I mean, I worked on the work comp side for so long. So the coaching side of it was fun for me. But so then everybody was saying, if you're going to be in the coaching space, you need a book. I'm like, why? So, I mean, I
And
know what I
the next
know.
answer is for credibility, because
Yes.
that's what they tell you. You need to have a book for credibility so people know that you know what you're talking about. Because God knows nobody ever wrote a book that had no clue what they were talking about.
Oh yeah, no kidding. I mean, there's only like million books about leadership. So yeah, that's why we have such a large gap in leadership in the world that we live in, is because there's a million books, right? Everybody knows what they're talking about. So
Yep.
I'm like, I don't want to write a book because that kind of book I don't like to read those kind of books. And I'll tell you why. The reason I don't like to read those books is I'll pick up the book, I'll read the title, I'll read the foreword, I'll read the introduction, I'll read the first chapter. I don't need the rest of the book. I know what the book is about. I got the big idea. The rest of it's kind of just fluff and filler to me. So I didn't want to write that kind of a book. So I started to think about, so if I'm going to write a book, what is it going to look like? And then the start with stop theme came up because I'll explain it like this. As a human race, all we've been doing since we became a human is kick the can down the road. If I look at anybody, I can tell you that if I'm in a room with anybody, that everybody in that room is basically on the same mission. And that is to try to get through the day without killing somebody or getting killed. And it really boils down to that. Now there's different nuances to it, right? So I want to hopefully I'm having great interactions with people. Hopefully I'm not having to deal with putting out fires. Hopefully I'm not dealing with relationship crises or health issues or things like that. But at the end of the day, those all come into play with I'm just trying to get to the end of the day so that hopefully I can go to sleep and not think about what a crappy day I had and wake up tomorrow and do it again. And really, when you think about it, we all know the definition of insanity, doing the
Doing the
same
same
thing
thing over and over again.
So really, we're all insane. So if we're going to do something different, then we have to start with stopping what we're doing already. And so that's where the title came from. Start with stop. Right? It sometimes you just have to come to a dead stop. Evaluate what's happening around you and figure out if what I did yesterday worked, then why am I in this position again today? So what I did was I wrote a book. It's 16 chapters. Each chapter stands on its own. It's one chapter, one transformation, 16 times. So the idea is you don't need another book on leadership. You just need a chapter. You don't need a book on time management. You just need a chapter. You don't need a book on communication. You just need a chapter. And there's different underlying themes in sections of the book, but you don't have to read every chapter. If you only want to read the chapter on relationships, go read the chapter on relationships. If you don't feel like you have an issue with time management, skip that chapter. I don't care. That's up to you. I mean, I'd love for you to read the whole book, but the point is I wrote the book that number one, I wrote the book that I would want to read. So maybe nobody's going to buy it because I wrote it, right? But
Well, you need to detach from the outcome.
but then the second part of it is I'm 57. So the second part of it is I wrote the book that I would have loved to have read when I was 27. So I wrote this book for my younger self, whoever that younger self might be that reads it, hoping that maybe I can shorten that window of learning for them and then move the needle faster in the direction that they want to go. So that's kind of a synopsis of if that's a long answer to the question, but
No.
there's kind of two pieces to it. But that's really where the whole thing came from is listen. And I'm not saying that the ideas that I'm giving you to try differently are the ones that are going to work, but they're ideas that you can try doing
Yeah,
differently.
they're options.
They're options. But it's open your mind up to the possibilities. You know, what could happen differently if I thought differently about this?
So let me ask you this: why do you think it's so hard for people to stop what they're doing and start in a different with a different approach or move into a different direction? Because it blows my mind. I mean, I see it a lot with producers over and over again. You know, where their book's not growing, it's not profitable, loss ratios out of whack. You know, their accounts are more service heavy than they need to be, but yet they continue doing the same things that they've done the entire time to build that book into what it is, which is what they don't want it to be, as opposed to saying, you know what, if we don't want the same results, we got to stop doing the same things that get us to those results. We need to know who our ideal prospects are. We need to stay with those people. We need to produce only those types of accounts because we know we have the service structure for it. We have the value adds. We have the carriers that have the appetite to write the coverage that we need. And we're only going to do that, and we're not going to take anything that's a distraction into our book anymore. And to me, that's one of the ones that I see people having the hardest time with, especially, again, I keep going back to us being in a digital era, but with inbound leads, right? Like right now, we're in the hardest market that we've ever had in the insurance industry. If I'm a producer, I'm putting my phone on do not disturb and I'm not answering it. I'm going to answer my emails, you know, in time blocks when I've got my calendar blocked so I can take the time to look through what I'm actually receiving and who I'm communicating with, because right now, there are so many distractions that are presenting themselves to you in the form of accounts that you would never write otherwise, that are out shopping because everybody's shopping. And you know that it's not the right account to work, but you also know that if you work, if I just do this one more thing, I'm probably going to be able to bring this account into my book of business and we'll have this much commission as a result. But in the meantime, the commission isn't even enough to offset the servicing load in the other issues that the account's going to present. We know the whole time we shouldn't be doing it. So what makes it so hard for us to stop?
So my perspective, I'm gonna answer that question, and hopefully it'll make sense to you. I know it'll make sense to you. Hopefully it makes sense to a lot of the listeners. It goes back to the premise behind the book. So we are creatures of habit. That's why the can just keeps getting kicked down the road. So I we don't live in comfort zones. People say you got to get outside of your comfort zone, but how many people are actually comfortable?
Yeah.
Right? So it's not really about comfort. It's about creatures of habit, which leads to familiarity. So it's not my comfort zone, it's my familiar zone. And my familiar zone, for most people, the zone that's familiar for them is extremely uncomfortable, but they don't want to leave it because it's what they know. So it's more of making the unfamiliar familiar than it is getting out of your comfort zone. Because what I want to get to is my comfort zone. I'm not comfortable in my familiar zone. I want to get to a comfort zone. I got to get out of my familiar zone. It's kind of backwards the way that we think about it, the way that we look at it, and the way that we talk about it. But it's not hard to think about it differently if you just start thinking about it differently, right?
And you're willing
Every
to. You have to be willing to think about it differently too.
But if you think about practical applications of it, we've all done it. Everything you do is hard until it's not. And it was only hard because it was unfamiliar. The more familiar it became, the easier it became. And when it becomes easy, then you're comfortable. See? So if you, to
Well, I
me,
mean,
that's
it's
really,
very similar to learning how to play a musical instrument. I mean, when you're saying that, in my mind, I'm thinking about the fact that I took piano lessons for like 15 years. And I remember what it was like the first time I sat down at a piano to try and play. I'm not going to play Moonlight Sonata or Für Elise or one of Chopin's waltzes. I'm going to sit down and play chopsticks. Maybe I'm going to learn, what the notes of the scales are, the different keys, what is an octave, all of the things that you need to know. And as that stuff begins to build on itself, at some point, and it's funny how this happens, but 5, 10 years down the road, it's like you can't even remember what that was like because now it's so natural to you because you made the conscious decision you were going to invest, you were going to implement and execute. And then the other thing is you got to practice, man. I think with all of this stuff, it can't just be, oh, I'm going to do this and now it's going to change. You're going to have bumps along the road and you have to practice and get those reps in every single day. And at some point, it does become second nature. At some point, you are in the comfort zone. Now, I don't practice the piano every day. I actually have one in my office that if I wanted to leave some stress, I could go back and do that. But would I be able to sit down right now and go play something that I could have played after I'd been taking lessons for 12 or 13 years? Absolutely not. I wouldn't remember the notes. I wouldn't remember the timing. My hands probably aren't, I would probably need to get them back used to spreading the keys on the piano and all of those things. But if I would have continued to practice every single day or a few times a week, I wouldn't have lost that. But I think that's an important thing for all of us to keep in mind. If we get to that level, we can't just rely that we're always going to stay there. There's a maintenance mode you have to go in to make sure you keep yourself where you want to be.
right. 100%. And there's a couple other things that I would say to answer the question, but one of them would be figuring out your motivation. If you're not motivated to change something, then you're not going to change it. But everything really kind of comes back to understanding your purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? And that's another disconnect. Like we talked about Josh earlier and the detaching from the outcome and how there's so much misunderstanding around that. I'm fascinated with the amount of misunderstanding that there is around start with why. I talk to people all the time. I'll be in a room. I was in a room I'd given a keynote back in the beginning of September. There was 75, 80 people in the room. And I said, if I had to ask you to raise your hand right now and tell me what your personal purpose statement is, how many of you can raise your hand and I could call on you? 2 hands. This is in a group of professional people. And I'm telling you right now, if you don't have that figured out, then you don't need to be trying to figure anything else out. You have to figure that out first, because everything else, that's your North Star. Everything else falls into place once you figure that out. The reason you feel like you're running around putting out fires all the time is because you don't have that figured out. The reason that you're stressed out and you can't figure out how to detach from the outcome is because you don't have that figured out. And there's all kinds of things. If you're feeling burnout, you don't have that figured out. If you're out of balance, you don't have that figured out. Everything comes back to that. And if you can figure that out, then you'll figure everything else will be easier to figure out after that.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And honestly, that's probably the mic drop moment we end the podcast. I mean, I know we're coming up on time anyhow, but that is a perfect place for us to end. So listen, everybody listening to this has been a really good conversation. I've enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you jumping on with me, Ray. If you would like a copy of Ray's book when it gets released, I will send one to the first 12 people who follow these directions. And keep in mind, we don't know the exact release date. We're targeting sometime in December. I say we like I'm in on this, but Ray is targeting sometime in December to have this released. So there will be a delay from the time you request this to the time that we can actually ship it. But I need you to send an email to david@killingcommercial.com. And all I need you to do in the subject line is put "Start with Stop," the title of his book, "Start with Stop." And in the body of the email, I need your name and your shipping address. That's it. I can't tell you the number of people who send me the email with the name of the book in the subject line, and they don't give me any shipping instructions whatsoever, and I can't send it to you. So give me the name of the book, start with stop in the subject line, your name and your email or your shipping address in the body of the email to david@killingcommercial.com. And the second that I have the ability to have those drop shipped from Amazon, I will do that and get them out to you. Until then, Ray, if they want to reach out to you, learn more, maybe like learn more about your mindful business coaching and how you can engage with, we have carriers and producers and agency principals and all kinds of people who listen to this. How do they get a hold of you?
So my email is ray@gagebontragerconsulting.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll see my face on LinkedIn. You'll see I'm friends with David, so you'll probably be able to figure that out. So find me on LinkedIn. Most people that we talk to that listen to your podcast are on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn, follow me, send me a DM. That might be easier than the remembering the email address. You could also, if you're interested in the book and you don't get to be one of the 12, you can go.
I was going to tell them that we're putting the link in the show notes. I saw the email that you sent yesterday, and I asked my team to make sure that that was put in there. So there's a way that they can go is it a pre-order link? In full transparency, I didn't click it to look.
It's not a pre-order link yet, but what it is it's a wait list. So you'll be,
okay, got it.
When we know when the book's going to be released, then we'll start making those announcements so people know when they're able to go on or to be able to click the link to order it.
Perfect. Sounds good, man. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to spend with me, and I hope you have a good weekend, and best of luck to you with the launch of the book. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fantastic, and with the branding on that thing, man, it's going to jump right off the shelves, at least visually, to everybody who looks at it, because it's certainly an eye catcher. So good job with that too.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome connecting with you. I love the conversation. I don't know. There's a possibility. We might have to have you on our podcast and just continue the conversation.
Anytime you're ready, man. You get to ask the questions on that one.
All right. Well, you have a great weekend as well. Thank you so much.
Take care. We'll see you.